This morning, Louisa successfully presented a trial lecture on the subject, Design of Games and Playful Experiences for Non-Human Creatures. And I'm happy to inform all of you that the lecture has been approved by the evaluation committee. And Louisa has successfully passed the required number of doctoral courses and submitted a thesis with the title Designing Movement-Based Play and Games in Theory and Practice. And since we are no new people here except for Yngve, I'm not going to repeat the... Oh, there are new people online. Okay, then I will repeat that the faculty has appointed an evaluation committee with the following members. As first opponent, Catherine Ispister, professor in the Department of Computational Media at the University of California, Santa Cruz, where she directs the Center of Computational Experience. And as second opponent, we have Stine Eising-Dun, Associate Professor in Design, Technology and Learning, and Co-Director of Center of Applied Game Research at the University of Aalborg. As administrating opponent, myself, Ole Andreas Alsos, Associate Professor in Interaction Design at the Department of Design. And as supervisors, we had the main supervisor, Professor Dag Svanes from Department of Computer Science, Alf Inge Wang, professor at the same department, and Beatrix Verreiken, professor at the Department of Neuromedicine and Movement Science. Dag and Beatrix are also project leads in the EXACT project, where you have been a PhD candidate. And the last co-supervisor, Hanna Elina Wirman, associate professor at the Department of Digital Design and Center for Digital Play at the IT University of Copenhagen. So, the thesis is now going to be presented by the candidates, which will take about half an hour, immediately followed by opposition from the first opponent. We will then take a short break and continue afterwards with opposition from the second opponent. For the audience, it's possible to ask questions ex auditorio. That means after opposition from the evaluation committee. And should anyone wish to ask a question, you need to inform me in the break. So I would now like to invite you to do your defense lecture.
I will. Thank you. And welcome again. And welcome to you new people who were not here before. I wrote this thesis with a lot of studies in it, called Designing Movement-Based Play and Games in Theory and Practice. So first, I'd like to just frame the journey that I went on. As part of the EXACT project, I set out to design exergames. So I thought, okay, exergames, that's exercise, and games as frames for exercise. So we're dealing with physical activity here, and then also games, the bodily play experience. We need to know about these things, and so I started researching, and I ended up in the field of movement-based interaction design of games. And I found it to be very, very human-focused. It was all about how to make the human player move and about the experience of the human player. And then I started wondering, what really is movement? Because, I mean, a chess piece also moves, and it moves in very specific ways. So what really is movement? Is it just something that we add, like salt and pepper to a dish? Or is it a mechanic, the nuts and bolts of the experience, the game, the structure, that we just add a bit more of odd movement here, we tweak it, or if we can just do this? Or is it just for transportation, like from one point to another? So that's a physical exercise. Yeah, and we can measure that and so on. Well, so Ole Keen, who's a neuroscientist and studies the brain, he says, it's translated from Danish. And he just won the Brain Prize for his work on this. He says, what's with movement is that it's the only expression our brain has. Right? We're always on the move when we walk and when I talk to you. It's how we interact with our surroundings. That's why movement is so incredibly essential. And he studies the brain. So I thought, okay, what then again, this bodily experience. What is movement as phenomenon? What does it mean to us? So I turned to phenomenology and Maxine Sheets-Johnstone, who has written extensively on movement in phenomenology. She has a background in dance, and she says that movement is our mother tongue. It's prelingual. We didn't invent language and then thought, okay, how are we going to do about it? Language, okay, we're then going to invent speech. No, language evolved through speech, through movement. So we move to think. She also calls it the roots of thinking. That's movement. Whenever we walk about, we take our body through movement. We take extremely many decisions without being conscious about them, and they're all based on our movement and how we have also learned to move and evolve through movement. So meaning, as she says, meaning arises in movement, and the way we understand movement and meaning, that's in movement sequences. We're not kind of like, okay, so I move my finger up and down and I do like this. No, I move my hand and I do like a wave. Okay, so that's how we actually understand movement. It's in sequences. So we understand the world through movement, and also the inactive approach. They say that they combine neuroscience and phenomenology and say that we perceive in action, we enact it. So I perceive the table and chair there to be table and chair. As I enact it, I move around it. And to Sheets-Johnstone, she would say, hey, yeah, we can do that because we have been moving around it. So we can assume and we can anticipate that it is how it is. We actually don't know because it could be totally different on the back, but we anticipate because we have moved, so we have learned so in movement. So we understand the world through movement. And further, Sheets-Johnstone and Dan Zahavi, also a highly prestigious phenomenologist, Danish, he says that it is through movement that we understand and distinguish ourselves from others. I know that you're not me because you're not moving. Your movements, they do not reflect mine, right? So you cannot be me, you know. And so with all of you other people, you're not moving the way your movement, they don't reflect mine, you know. But the flaw, it turns out to be a flaw. It actually rejects my movements, right? I do not go through the flaw. So it rejects my movements and it constitutes me as well as it constitutes the flaw, because I do not go through the flaw. So it stays and then constitutes me and the flaw also. So movement also delineates bodies. So that's how I know the chair and table, they are chair and tables. And we know that, for instance, when we get blinded by the light, we get these white spots on our eyes, right? And they just don't, I mean, they don't stay where they are. They move with our eyes movement, you know, so we know that it is part of my body. How annoying. And that's also why I know, even if I try to stand as still as I can, I can perceive all the things around me, that they are not part of me because they are not following me, they're not reflecting my movement. But in this understanding, it was very human focused, the movement based interaction design and game design. And so I turned to posthumanism because it sees human and non-humans as equals, and it doesn't see the human as an encapsulated, or things and humans as encapsulated entities, but we are one, and we are all embodied, and we are actually part of the same, we are embedded embodiment. Right? And humans and non-humans, they are co-constituting. Like I was saying, hey, I know that I'm me because when I hit the floor, it doesn't reflect my movements, it rejects my movements. And this too, so I get my arm here. If I didn't get that, I would be just flowing. So we are co-constituted in the world and not just encapsulated entities. From this, I started thinking, okay, how can we then work with movement now that we know these things? And I figured out that, okay, so we have movement and bodies, and then we have surrounding conditions and so on. They're co-constituted, but we can work with these, right? Every movement is connected to a body that's preconditioned, and then again, it's conditioned by the surroundings as it moves, right? We're conditioned by gravity on Earth. We're not in outer space. And that's also a surrounding condition that will affect the way we can move and things can move. So what we can do with, now that I conceptualized it into bodily preconditions, surrounding conditions, we can actually start to work with it as designers, because we can model and remodel and configure, and we can actually turn the nuts and bolts and tweaks and so on. So they can be influenced, modeled, and prepared by designers. But let's just take a step to playing games before we start combining these into play and games. A simple but very, very useful definition of playing games are that they are attempts of overcoming unnecessary and arbitrarily chosen obstacles. And I combined Bernard Suits with Roger Calois, two ideas. They say almost the same. Suits is the one with the unnecessary obstacles, and Calois saying arbitrarily chosen obstacles. And they're both two very famous play scholars. So I combined this into unnecessary and arbitrarily chosen obstacles. And I derived this idea of the bodily play experience as these are attempts of overcoming unnecessary or arbitrarily chosen obstacles. However, as they emerge from bodily preconditions and surrounding conditions, and they form a synergy of series of movement sequences into kinetic joyrides. So we go back again to Maxine Sheets-Johnstone and her movement sequences. She talked about movement and play, how they are natural bedfellows. And she calls it, when it is play, an experience, it is a kinetic joyride that stems from or emerges out of a synergy of series of movement sequences. So that's, yeah, I'll explain it in the next slide. I also explained that in the trial lecture. There are I see two ways from the Danish language, at spille, at lege, bodily behaviors, bodily doings. And they equally lead to kinetic joyrides, but they do so differently. Like the doing of at spille would be the football example, right? I go, I have my determined movements. They are really determined. I have the ball there, and I go and I kick the ball and I get it into the goal, and yeah. But it's not about really getting it into the goal. That's the synergy of me seeing the ball there and all of the other players, and I combine these movement sequences of running, and then I kick the ball and I get the ball, and it actually also gets into the goal. It could also not get into the goal, but I would still get this synergy of movement sequences that would just be this kinetic joyride. The means becomes the end, right? So if we are at lie, then I would, the example of dancing, right? I'll start combining, moving my legs in a tempo and the upper body, and it would both be to the beat, and I will start combining all my movements into this beat or to the rhythm of the music, and that would also make up a kinetic joyride. But these are two ways of making kinetic joyrides. They still go into being playful, right? And the unnecessary and arbitrarily chosen obstacles emerge from these bodily preconditions, right? I'm very standard bodily preconditioned human, right? 2 legs and 2 arms and so on. But I put on the restraint that I'm not allowed to take the ball into my hands and just go to the goal and put it in there, So I need to kick it and so on. So these are the unnecessary and arbitrarily chosen obstacles that we put up, and that will also make up the game of football, stemming from how we tweaked the bodily preconditions together with the surrounding conditions. And we still think that it's extremely interesting to watch for 2 times 45 minutes, 22 highly trained humans never succeeding to get the ball into the goal. But it's still interesting, right? So they are really unnecessary and arbitrarily chosen obstacles, but they make up a lot of kinetic joyrides for both players and the others. And that's the same with the dancing, right? Why would I start moving just, why? Well, because it gives me a kinetic joyride. It's play, but it's still really unnecessary, and it's also can be very arbitrarily chosen. Start doing this like that. Why? What's the meaning of that? And so on. But we still understand these things, right? So if we are to turn these bodily preconditions, surrounding conditions, into ideas, concepts that we can actually tweak and do things with as designers, so that we can start using them for our designs. We can turn bodily preconditions into restrictions on bodily preconditions for movement, and I call them restraints. The surrounding conditions, I turn them into paraphernalia, which are the elements needed for the activity. And paraphernalia is just a common word that's actually used for also all game elements and so on that are used there. But when we talk about those, we say that, oh, that's a ball, that's a cone, that's a goal, and so on. We don't talk about them in a generic way so that they are extracted from the device as such and into an idea of how can we then create devices and functions and attributes. So that was what I did. First, bodily preconditions as restraints. I derived 3 mechanics from my studies. And their fixation of body parts, right, can be that players can only, they need to hold each other's hands, right? So that's fixated like that, or balloon dancing, where you dance with a balloon between your heads, right? So it's fixated to the balloon, head is fixated. But it can also be a racket in tennis, like, your hand will then be fixated by the racket. So there's exclusion of body parts as well. The football example, you cannot use your hands to play, to touch the football. And the reversed part in handball, you're not allowed to kick the ball with your feet, and so on. So we can exclude body parts. You're not allowed to use that part or that part, and so on. And also deprivation or manipulation of bodily senses. We know that from blind man's buff, and we also know it when we deprive, we're blindfolded, or also ear muffled, like when we go like playing a game of chess. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's restraints. The surrounding conditions then. First of all, there are 4, and the first of it is collectibles. There are some that's games call to action. And it's a state-changing event when it's actually collected. But it can be collected in many ways. It can be avoided, it can be protected, it can be hit, it can be kicked, it can be thrown away, or it can be hidden. You need to find it, and so on. But so the action is can be different, but it has a state-changing. It's a state-changing event when it is actually happening. So when you conquer the ball in football, you reach the state where you're actually able to score a goal, right? Or you get a point, or when the catcher in a game of catch is catching one of the other players, that other player will then be the catcher, and so on. So there is a state-changing change when it is succeeded, or it's a state change is also avoided. So when a catcher does not catch one of the participants, the state is not changed. So that demarcations, we mark off not just the magic circle as a concept, but we also need to mark off often. We don't have to. These are all, they're not present in all games and so on, but we can choose to use them. So demarcations will just be, this can be, I'm marking off a goal here and then the table. So now I'm the goalkeeper. So that will just be a demarcation. It doesn't have to be a special object, but it just has the function of a demarcation. That can be inside, outside. There can be a zone where you're allowed to do a specific action, or you're not allowed to do a specific action. It can also just be territories like that. And then we have the environmental conditions, right? So those are, we're inside a house now. So these are the walls. There's light. We could have darkness. We could have snow, then we would be able to ski. So some games are even based on these environmental conditions. For instance, swimming is very, very difficult to do without having water, right, to swim in, and so on. So these can also, and then we can put demarcations into the water and so on. Right now we have the floor. It could be concrete, it could be asphalt, it could be grass, and it could be raining. Could also be an environmental condition. We have gravity, and outer space we don't have any gravity unless we make it. Action enablers, and I put technology into parentheses because it resembles very much the technology that we actually use, because a racket is also a technology, right? So it's an action enabler. It's something that enables us to do an action that we would not otherwise be able to. That's also just a stick to hit the cans. We throw a stick, and that's also an action enabler. Otherwise, I would not be able to hit the cans from here to there. So, but these are also action enablers, or also VR, right? Imagine how much action we can do with a VR set that we cannot do without it. So it is not necessarily in this idea of augmenting anything, but it's just a technology that we use for an action. The interesting thing with action enablers is that they can also become a restraint. They can infer a restraint, right? So you're restricted by the racket in tennis, but you're also enabled by it. A set of roller skates, you're enabled to roller skate faster and so on, but you're also restricted by the roller skates, right? They put on a bodily restraint. These mechanics, they can be chosen to be part of a design or not. They don't have to be there, all of them, and they can take up different roles, different mechanics. One element, one object can take up can have different, can serve as different mechanics. And they can also even change during a game and activity. So what was a collectible can then also work as a demarcation, right? In a maze, you need to, like I did later, you need to go through a maze, and then you turn one light cube into green. It's a collectible, but it's also a demarcation that marks off actions. Right. From these mechanics, these ideas, I assembled a game system. I called it the Move Maker. It's an example game, and I assembled it from various elements that I found to have the qualities to be various kinds of paraphernalia or restraints. It was also during COVID, so I also assembled it from what was available to me. What could I order on the internet? And then I assembled it. We have here the light cubes. They are good as collectibles, right? You can either collect them physically. You can also turn them around, and they change color. They change color like this. They also work as demarcations, like getting through the maze. They can mark off the maze as well as being a collectible. I made a set of laser lights that are good as making lines. They're good at demarcations as well, inside, outside, and so on. But they can also serve as collectibles, so you need to go down one and up another, and then all the way over. Then I have music cubes. They're triggered by a proximity sensor, and then they play for 2 bars. The music will make up in an environmental condition. So will the light cubes as well. They will bring light as well. The music boxes, the proximity sensor, also could resemble an action enabler, as you're enabled to play the music. And then I had the cards. Oh, that was the wrong one. The cards, these are restraint cards, making up various, these 3 kinds of restraints that the players could draw and then apply a restraint as they wanted to. And I made a set of mini games that were also example games to have different kinds of playing games with the set. And then I needed something to move, because these are cubes and they move. They can move. I mean, but I needed something that was more movable than just a cube. And so I assembled this robot, which is here, which is really yeah. It's not so glad anymore. It's been played with a lot, so it needs really attendance. But yes, I think so. Yeah. But one set of wheels is really having a hard time. But I wanted something to move that could also serve as a collectible, for instance, and would also put up restraints. So the robot, as we have here, which is a bit tired. It also constitutes a moving body when it wants to move. It doesn't. There's no movement anymore. It is recharged and everything. But anyway, yeah. I want to. So it has a movement repertoire of its own, right? It's very slow right now, but it's a moving body, and it moves on its own. But when I move with it, we constitute the playing body, right? We constitute one body that is moving when it's moving. But pay attention to my bodily preconditions. It is bodily preconditioned in a very different way than I am, right? It doesn't have 2 legs and it doesn't have 2 arms. So, but yet we manage to move together. And so our movements are mapped in different ways. Right? I map my hands onto it now. I map my legs onto it now. And they are distributed, right? Now it moves. And I move. So my movements and its movements, we move together, and they're distributed and mapped across bodies. So movement also connects bodies across domains, right? In our relationship with technology, movement connects bodies as it is distributed and mapped across different domains. For instance, physical and virtual, human and non-human. This was human and non-human. Let's see if it still wants to move. But it can also be virtual. So I'm playing, for instance, VR. I have my controllers and so on. I have an in-game character that is moving also. And I know that it belongs to me, and we can constitute one body because it reflects my movements. I recognize it as my movements, but I also recognize it as its own body because it's also slightly moving in slightly different ways, and it can be also differently mapped. But still, when I move, it reflects my movements. I constitute one body through the movement. And a very, very simple example is the mouse, computer mouse. You take the mouse, you move it, and the cursor moves, and I know that now we're connected, and it moves because it reflects my movements, and I can do things and so on in the virtual world to constitute one moving body. And when it doesn't move, or you cannot find it, and so God, you just access your movement, right? And it appears somehow, sometimes it doesn't, then it's our batteries. Then it suddenly appears as a technology, right? That I'm moving about and around and so on, and it's not really part of my body anymore. It's not part of my movement repertoire, at least for a while, right? So in that way, we also distribute movements, right? I distribute the moving body that I constitute with the computer mouse and the cursor in there. It's also distributed, right? So our moving body as a whole, it's distributed into between the cursor and me as a physical body. And when we are in a game world, playing games, the bodily play experience is not just my experience as my encapsulated entity, right? Because I'm embedded in this. So it also constitutes from all the movement possibilities that I perceive, that I can actually move around the tables and so on. I can move up the tables, and also you move around, and your movements also affect my experience. So the bodily play experience is the sum of all of these movements going on, and also in negotiations and exchanges of movements, but also the possibilities that I perceive from my bodily preconditions that will emerge as surrounding conditions. So when we design movement-based play and games, we can also discuss whether or not everything is really movement-based. But if we look at movement, how movement is constituted, how it emerges, and how we can work with it as designers in these experiences, we can model, configure, experiment, explore, reconfigure, remodel, and whatever other verb you can come up with. We do so with restraints and paraphernalia, and these apply to anybody in the game, not just physical bodies, human bodies, and so on. They apply to anybody that is constituted by movement and that will appear as such through movement. And we also can remodel and configure, experiment and explore, and all of that with the mappings and distributions of movements across domains, but also across bodies. We can map it and we can distribute it between co-players. Now we're trying to we're together and so on. And then no, now we're not mapped together. And movement is distributed. So if we start thinking how movement emerges and constitutes bodies as we move, we can start working with restraints and paraphernalia to tweak the nuts and bolts of the experience, but also doing so through the mappings and the distribution of movements across these bodies. So towards understanding the underlying dynamics of bodily play and game experiences, we can ask the questions, who or what is moving or being moved? Because sometimes we're also moving by being moved, like if we are in a roller coaster, right? We are moving, but we are also being moved. And that is movement. How is movement conditioned and then preconditioned, right? That goes for anybody. And that's also where post-humanism, humans and non-humans are equal. There is no sovereignty. So I might be very standard bodily preconditions for a human, but we can work with that. I can be differently bodied. And that will make up another experience and another point of view. We can ask how are movement sequences connected, distributed, and mapped across humans, non-humans, and the various domains involved in the activity. If we start looking how movement is constituted and it emerges, not just from the human player or the human physical players, we start to know more about what actually constitutes the bodily play experience. What are we experiencing and how can we design for and with it? So last thing, how does the emerging movement as different doings form kinetic joyrides? That was, how are we dancing? And then I jump onto a train and I start dancing in the train and so on. Or the football, right? It was very determined, and I sat on the bike and I just so we can start to look at full bodies moving and how these emerging movements form kinetic joyrides as different doings. Yes, thank you very much for listening.
Okay, I thought about having a break, but I think we'll continue with the first opponent immediately. I would like to invite first opponent, Catherine Ispister, professor in the Department of Computational Media at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and director of Center for Computational Experience, to proceed with her opposition. And you are welcome to take a stand here.
So first, thank you for the excellent presentation. So as you probably know from yesterday in my little talk, in my group, we do research through design. So I was extremely curious about some of the aspects of the choices that you made in MoveMaker. And so my first question is kind of addressing design to elicit a little bit more from you about that. And so I'm interested in your own modeling, configuring, experimentation during your process of design. What led you to the choices you made about the elements, other than, of course, you mentioned COVID and these constraints. Did you test the elements yourself? Did you make modifications of the component set over time? Did you pre-test the installation with people, maybe perhaps your own family? And if so, what did you learn, if anything, that influenced the final deployed version that went out to the others during your tests?
Yeah, I just go back to the slide. It's easier to talk about. Yes. Well, there was COVID, and yeah, so the test people were my family, and then actually, and then also one grandparent and one friend, and that was just before the curfew of COVID. So, but I tested the robot actually, and I also changed this one. It was in the beginning a full square, and I also tested how to combine these together. And this moves a bit easier than the full square because it's just smaller. And then these are not connected, and when they were connected, it just went totally off like that, you know. And I couldn't move. I couldn't move to the sides because when I triggered this one, all triggered, right? Because they were connected, so it was just moving forward. So I disconnected them, and then when now it's a bit broken anyway for that how it was. But when I then triggered this one, it would move in that direction. So there were more kind of possibilities, movement possibilities actually. In doing so, it didn't move as fast, but it didn't really seem to be the issue. It didn't have to move fast, particularly also because I was aiming at people's homes. And in Copenhagen, they can be very tiny.
Yes, they can be small.
So it didn't have to be like moving very fast. And I also saw that actually from the test when it was out in the families that it wasn't. That was actually also moving in quite a good speed, because then it could be moved in and out of all the chairs and all the furniture and so on. So had it moved much faster, I'm not necessarily would have encouraged the same kind of play. But the other things, the light tubes, it's bought like this. And it was heavily tested, of course, by them and so on. So I didn't test it myself also because it doesn't really make much options for changing anything in it. So it comes much as it is. So I just had to work with it as it was.
What about your cards? What made you choose those particular constraints? And did you iterate those?
Yes, I actually did. Because I started out just saying we have fixations of body parts, exclusion of body parts, and then deprivation and manipulation of bodily senses. And so I took all bodily senses, or like what can be kind of deprived, and I just turned it into a card. And then I took every body part. We have like arms and legs and so on, and I put on fixations. So these are fixated to your back and so on, and they can be excluded. But in the beginning, they were far too open. They were far too open. So saying your left hand is fixated to question. So come up with it yourself, because I wanted to encourage bodily creativity, and I wanted to encourage also playfulness and so on. But it was far too much creativity and or too much to ask for, because your right arm is fixated too, and then if you really wanted to give yourself high advantage, you would just find something easy, and if you would make a high advantage and so yeah, it was. It could be interruptive actually for the social play. So I made a new version of them. Actually, I think I have 3 sets, that's the middle. That was the first version, and then the middle version was okay. Your left arm is glued to your back, and your right foot is not allowed to touch the floor. Okay, so I made it much more kind of like what. Also imagining what we have floors and what is just normal in a
like
in
the
a home
context.
and so on,
Yeah,
in
yeah.
context, and also hold each other's hands. That would be a fixation and so on, and then we tested it with one grandparent, and it seemed to be, it could be perhaps too difficult with bodily, because if your right foot is not allowed to touch the floor, it might be too heavy for the players.
Yes.
So I made a third set of cards that were just much more elaborate, or kind of like at least anticipated a more easy restraints version of restraints.
Yeah.
And I sent them all out, these cards, and I grouped them, and I also marked them so that these, and explained that these are easy, these are medium, and these are
like difficulty level.
Yeah, difficulty level.
Yeah.
And I didn't really get much. I didn't really get much feedback on the card types, so I think they were just kind of meshed together and just found as such as they were. But the first version of the cards that were were kind of open, I aimed that for also designers.
Yeah.
So that it could be an open part to design with restraints.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. That helps me see your iteration process. And
yeah.
So maybe kind of tagging on to that, this whole notion of the play versus the game. And I'm wondering, like, how much of this, if you were to take a step back, do you think can be designed into any given experience, and how much of it is coming from the context of play? And if you saw any evidence as you distributed this game, did you see emergent strategies? Did you feel that your design shaped strategies? So, where do you think the balance lies as a designer and practitioner?
Yeah, I think for me, it's easy to imagine a system and just modeling it and play, and let's go now. But it's not that easy for not play designers and not designers, even though they are highly creative, and even though they are also intellectuals trying out new things and into new technology and so on. They're not playing game designers, and I could really see that. So what I wanted to test, or what I imagined to be testing, I could probably have more success testing in a lab where I could be the game master, and I could just tweak it the way to see if that does, if it encourages them in this way and that way. And I wasn't. I had no control, and I couldn't even see the whole space, the whole place, right? I could only see what they recorded, right? And even though they were part of my network, I had only been in 2 of the homes before. I didn't know the home, so I didn't know how they also were, and why they chose the kitchen and not the living room and so on. I could ask them, of course, but they all said that they set it up where they had most space and so on, right? But I did. But I did see it was an not really a disruption, but there was so huge difference between what was a prototype and what was the off-the-shelf product. So these were also just used as night light and so on,
Yeah.
which is also okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, that happened, and it's okay to happen. And it was interesting because I learned that when you mix up what is really thoroughly tested and a product that's successful and so on against something that's a prototype, there's this that we know as designers, the huge difference between a prototype and a thoroughly tested product.
Sure.
And I mean, those differences, of course, come up, and they influenced also the test. And also these parts, they were taken apart and put together in different ways and so on, which is also awesome.
Yeah.
But they are made for that.
Yeah.
So what they were already made for kind of took over or kind of could be the dominating and was in instances the dominant play. And I was like, yeah, but I'm not testing their products because they already tested. So that was also that was difficult in that kind of study. And had it been in a lab, they also wouldn't have been so open and just doing with things. So it's a trade-off. It's always this trade-off how you test it, right? And had it been in a lab, they wouldn't have started to
take it apart.
Yeah. And so on. Yeah.
So what's interesting about your answer is there's a conflation between longing for a different kind of testing situation, but also something I'm hearing you say, and I wonder how it fits into your taxonomy, is the notion of training people how to have fun with a system. And then in some sense, like you were trying to study how they would have emergent fun, but I also heard in some of your answer that you would have liked to give them a little bit of prompting or direction or like coaching in a way with the elements, right? So I'm wondering how that fits into your system. If we think of restraints and paraphernalia, like how would you categorize tutorial or training or even social learning, watching someone else play? Like how would you think of that and situated kind of within how you structure?
Yeah. I think the idea of a game system is good and also modular. But there aren't many modular game systems as such in this way that are so modulable or
so open.
Yeah. And that's a learning in itself, right? Normally when you buy a game system, it's already tested for just simple usability so that you can start playing faster. And there was this lack of just simple usability was also a barrier. So it was difficult just to understand a game system like that, and not something that is, we have a screen, we have a console, we have some controllers, and we have these things, or we have a football kit, we have 2 goals and so on, or table tennis, and so getting the head around a system that's that they can model in that way and put up is in itself a new step.
Sure.
So what I found was that it needed really good instructions on this is how you should set up the maze. But the problem is that if you are designing it for home use, you don't know the space, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But of course you can design for it and so on, but it's just a very long process of its own to figure out all of these different contexts and so on.
Sure.
So that was one barrier. That was just setting up the system. But at points they then just set it up more simple, which was really fine. All good. And then they also started to just mix it a bit together and so on, which was also good. The the barrier was that it came from them not understanding it in the first place. And then
Yeah.
they had to kind of say, okay, I do really want to understand this and not just discard it. Right?
Yeah. It's a very complex situated problem that
Yes,
ended
it
up
is.
being, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. All right. So let's move to theory. So I'm just curious, you talked about bridging concepts and strong concepts in the various papers in your thesis. And I'm interested in just your preference between these types of structuring of localized knowledge, because you're going to go off and you're going to do more knowledge structuring. So which of those do you feel is better suited to the kind of work you do, and why? Like, do you have an affinity for one or the other, and why so?
I'm much grounded in theory. So the most used approach has been bridging concepts, right? Because it comes from theory and looks at, but strong concepts that originates in a design idea, of course, also has its place, because then once you go to theory and you start looking at designs and designing, it will emerge and evolve as a strong as a design idea, right? So there is this combination in methods where they work together.
Yeah.
So you have one that was pretty much my approach, starting in theory, bridging concepts, and I look at designs and I learned this about the designs and exemplars, and I get these ideas and then start to design myself. Of course, get also design ideas because I'm also a designer. So also get these kind of like, this is my design idea. So how start designing with it and evolving and developing the idea, right? And then I of course then would go to what does theory say, what is related work, and so on, and it will then have an approach of strong concepts.
Yeah, that's great. And so I'm curious, because you seem to be a very physical person. Do you think that your own presence or being as a moving body influenced your research? And if so, how?
Yes.
Like,
yes, of course. Thinking in movement.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah.
And doing it and so on. Yeah.
Okay.
Of course. And that's also why I end up in these problems where I make this system, and I think that, well, other people can also just understand it if I explain it well enough, and then they don't understand it necessarily, even though I can explain and explain, but they don't have the same bodyliness as I do. So they need to learn it and think through movement, right? Think in movement, have this experience and learn it in that way.
That makes a lot of sense.
So it does, on the good side and bad side.
So which contribution are you most pleased with from this research? Like, what do you feel is most going to live on from this piece of work? Or maybe those are two separate questions. Which is your favorite contribution, and which do you think is going to have legs, so to speak, to make a movement metaphor?
Yeah, I like the idea of the of how restraints and paraphernalia, they work together in creating movement, and that they apply to any body and not just the physical body, but we can also design the robot from those kinds of ideas, right? A ball, we can design things from those ideas and the description of the mechanics, the functions, and the attributes for the activity. Those I like, but I hope that it all can be used, that the people will learn or can use it.
Yes.
For something.
Yeah, it's hard to know in advance.
Yeah. I don't know.
That's fine. And then another one, I'm just curious, thinking about this post-human movement and game and play design, are there any examples out there in the world of designed play or game experiences that you feel also emerge out of this tradition that you find admirable? I mean, in going about your research, did you find other?
But I think basically all games and play are in this kind of idea of post-human, because we don't see, I mean, players also become objects, right? They also become collectibles and so on.
Yeah.
So in play and game, we kind of dissolve these borders, and we can also manifest them, but then we manifest them in the magic circle, right? As an answer or response to something, or exploring bodily practices and so on. So I think that the post-humanist idea or understanding is inherent in play and games, because players become collectibles, and they also become demarcations and so on. And they on the same level as objects, right? So I think it's
so maybe a counter question would be, are there any examples of games or play experiences that you think are designed badly or go awry because they're not really taking this perspective? I mean, I see what you're saying. It's kind of a structural analysis, but I'm also curious, like, could you point to, oh, that's a terrible play experience because the person who crafted that really isn't thinking this way? Maybe not, but anything come to mind?
I've never thought of them as that. I think I just didn't discard it.
Yeah, it's
Maybe
more structural analysis
about it.
Maybe it's for discussion over dinner later.
I think so. I mean, but that's because I'm thinking, but then we could think about these games where we have something that's superior, but then it's actually reversed because it is in play. Then if we have the king, we defend the king in chess and so on. That is the superior, because you win or lose, right? It ends the game, right? But then again, does it really then manifest sovereignty, or doesn't it then just manifest, or isn't it what we then play with these bodily practices, that we have a king that we need to protect, as like we have something to protect? I've never thought of chess being badly designed, and I think
that's an ambitious
so I don't
to take.
and I wouldn't really say that, but I mean, but that would be thinking of post-humanism in that kind of way. If we have a sovereignty that we defend, but then we all have a sovereignty, and we can also decide. I mean, in Denmark, also in Norway, we do actually have a king and a queen. And they do manifest this kind of sovereignty. And then play and games, they have this frame where we are exploring the bodily practices in a different way that also will resolve these or dissolve these laws and rules, or turn them upside down and so on.
And through the active play. Yeah. I can see that. How am I doing on time? Okay. So another question that came to my mind, you had to do a lot of reading to situate this work. I'm curious if there are any literatures that you would like to investigate next to sort of round out your understanding of this domain. And if so, what are they?
I'd really love to dive more into quantum mechanics and quantum physics.
Oh, really? How do we make this connection? Interesting.
Because that's Barat, right? Karen Barat. She talks about and derives her book Halfway to the Universe is also based on quantum mechanics and quantum physics and Niels Bohr's philosophies, and she talks about this interaction where things emerge as they are done, kind of like we're doing in our doing, things emerge as they are, and they will also reconfigure constantly because we negotiate, right, as we move about. And if looking into quantum mechanics and quantum physics, it's both, right? It can be, you know, then and that's what I'm going to look into.
Yeah.
But that's also what it's based on. What she based it on is like when and in for example quantum computing, a bit is both turned on and turned off. Right? And it can be both blue and red, but it depends on how they emerge in interaction with everything that is also part of the interaction, and that I find extremely interesting when we talk about these meetings between virtual worlds and the physical world, because the virtual world emerges, particularly also just simple procedural gaming and mechanic and so on, procedural graphics and so on, how they emerge from these interactions. And so I think that that's really interesting to look into.
So would that lead you into designerly directions as well? I mean, it sounds like it's a very evocative theory for you. Could you see it shaping some kind of play experience you might craft?
Yeah, if we can start defining things from how they emerge in interaction, that gives us a different way of constantly changing the play, the situation, as how we also do it to fit our doings.
Sure.
And that's individually, but also as a group. And if we can start to think in these terms, play is already emerging like that and evolving all the time. Right? So, and if we can start to think those ideas into our design, that they can actually emerge, and we can do that with digital technology, right? So we then we can start to design. I don't know how, but that's another longer.
You got a whole research career to get to.
Yeah. But then we can start to use digital technologies to encourage, or at least also support, but also encourage, but also influence this, because in playing games we like unnecessary and arbitrarily chosen obstacles, and the technology can help us also
Generate
create those. Generate those. Yeah. Procedural generation. That was what I was trying to say before. Yeah, I just couldn't find the words. Yeah,
I think those are my questions. Well done.
Thank you very much.
Take a nice break now.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you for an interesting discussion. And now we'll take exactly 10-minute break. Yeah. And we'll start again here, 14:36 exactly. So in the meanwhile, we'll get Stine back on video. Okay, we'll do some sound check. So just disregard everything I say and do here. Can you try to turn on the sound?
Yeah,
Strange. Try to log off and on. Okay. Try to say something, Stina.
Yeah, okay. I'm saying something now. I'm talking. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can see that there is coming sound, but it's not.
The thing is that people who are online, they can actually hear me. So it's somehow not coming out of your speakers, but it's actually coming into Zoom.
So that roots of thinking is movement, and that every intention we have results in movement. That's Ole Keen, the neuroscientist, who says that. Then we cannot really divorce intention from movement or from our doing. What we do is our intention, but we do so as part of the world, as an embedded. We're embedded in this, and so we are not just having our own intention. It is also based on whatever we are part of, and it is much more influenced when we see it as a movement, as our doing. It is also much more influenced by what we are part of, what we are embedded in, than we actually think, because we do much more than we think. So there is this it's like we are intentional, but together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense that the intentions are intertwined and responding to each other's intention. We saw it also before when you tried to make the robot work. You said, why doesn't it want to move? It's becoming lazy or whatever, or tired. So you also kind of you put intentions into or feelings, emotions, kind of social stances into the technology around you. But if you didn't propose kind of divorcing things from the intentions, as I think you wrote in your cape, but kind of trying not to focus on the intentions and focus on the doings instead, then what is kind of the purpose of that?
But the doing is the intention.
Yeah, exactly. So you don't want to go away from intentions at all?
No.
No. Okay. Well, that's interesting.
But they are in our doings. Yeah, we cannot do without intentions. But I think that the gap, maybe what you might be talking about, is whether they are conscious or not, because we also have intentions unconsciously, right?
Yeah, it's when you mention post-humanism and how post-humanism doesn't focus on understanding things and actors for the intentions of the human beings, but divorcing them from those intentions instead, looking at the doings. Just like if you wanted to know about the experiences of the animals that you talked about in your trial defense, then you don't know about their intentions because you can't ask them. You have to look at their doings instead. So it's kind of this relation that I'm pointing at. Okay. Sorry.
No. It's just that I don't divorce it from intention, but that just it's in our doing. So we cannot do anything without having and there is an intention behind whatever it might be, and often we are not even aware of it ourselves, right? So that there's an awareness. I don't think that posthumanism wouldn't dissolve a human to be a non-human. They say that humans are humans and they acknowledge human bodies, but they just put them on equal level.
Yeah.
So humans are not sovereign. We are not. We're not more entitled. They work a lot with this kind of entitlement, like so they don't. Posthumanism. Humans aren't entitled more than animals, for instance. So it's not to dissolve the human from being human. The human is very much human, and an animal is very much an animal. But it's rather dissolving the sovereignty, the entitlement that posthumanism claims that humanism put in, where man is the center, so man is sovereign, man is dominating, and that's also where feminists, they find their inspiration, right? In that there is no sovereignty. We're all equal, but they highly acknowledge, and I also think that I write that it's not to understand that we don't, or that posthumanism does not acknowledge the human as human. It's simply more the entitlement.
Yeah, so when you read a situation like the play situation, you don't try to read out what the designer tried to do when designing the game, but you're looking at how the different aspects of the game are actually doing something in the situation. They're acting, they're all actors. So the robot, the lights, the sounds, the cards, and the human agents are all acting together, and you're trying to read these actings instead of talking about the intentions behind, because then you're making a human-centric reading of the situation. And
Yes,
what I was
yes,
trying to sorry.
Yes, but what I've looked at also, there are traditional games, and they evolved from from cultures, right? And they can change in various ways. So there hasn't been one designer behind it, but of course we can try to see a design as what are we supposed to do, but play, at least how I understand play and how I see play is that play evolves as an interaction between, and of course designers, they express themselves and they also talk through the design. We are also influenced here in this room, and also in our hybrid space, very much by all the designers that has been there designing these things, and put them up, and how we put them into the room, the colors, and there's a psychology in colors too, and so on. So of course we are influenced by all of this, and we're influenced that we're not aware of. So of course we are just we're overwhelmed by intentions. So I've not looked at what the intentions were. Sometimes I've looked at the intentions, but also looked at what actually happens. What is the interaction of it? How does it emerge? And that's probably it's like, you know, you might see a table and a chair, and we know culturally what that means, but you can also see, and I'm quite sure that my 13-year-old boy down there, he also sees this as an obstacle course, right? So he would be jumping all over. I can see it as a drum. also, and I could put up a drum ensemble here and so on. So this is more like the post-humanist idea is that it emerges in interaction between who perceives it and how it is perceived and what are the intentions and so on. And we choose through movement how to do the things we do. So I choose how I do the table, right? If it's in part of an obstacle course, if it's turned into a drum, or so that's more like I look at it from the role, the function it has with the attributes. And that, but the intentions, they were, for instance, we talked about before in MoveMaker, the designer's intentions, for instance, with the light cubes, it was so strong. It was so strong in the design that it overruled my way of using it as a function, as a mechanic. So the intentions, of course, are there. And sometimes they are so strong that they will overrule whatever other intentions we have.
Yeah, they get too noisy in the configuration.
Yeah, also that, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. So another thing that I'm curious about is you talk about different kind of games and use some examples. You use dancing as one of them, and you also use soccer and such. And I was thinking about kind of the different kind of movements that constitute flows and continuous plate moves and practices. How do they work together with your kind of framework of restraint and sorry, I forgot the other word right now.
Paraphernalia?
Yeah, paraphernalia, sorry.
Yeah.
Like for instance, you're from Denmark, I guess, building Legos, like, and being kind of totally engaged in that and building something up continuously is different from kind of wrecking something or teasing each other or something. It's kind of different practices and moods. How do you explain kind of these different kind of movements that are building on to each other within your framework?
Yeah. Well, if you build in Lego, I'd say that you're also experimenting and exploring bodily practices, right, in different ways. Depends on what you're building, but the building in itself is also a bodily practice, right? So you, of course, explore also the Lego bricks, but you would start to build. You would start explore and experiment the bodily practice of what you were building, and at least also how you are perceiving it, how you are enacting it. Right. I believe that you would continuously also enact what you are building. So I put 2 bricks up there. How's that? Oh, and then you enact it and think, okay, or you even move it around in your hands, right? You go like, was that how I wanted it? Was it not? And so on. And even if you're looking or you're building from one of the manuals, you go like, was that? Then you count and so on. So you also enact it, how to move about it and what are its possibilities as such, right? It doesn't need to movement doesn't need to be big. It can also just be these tiny fine motor things, but it's still moving in your hands and you enact it and see it from its possibilities, its movement possibilities from kind of a bodily practice.
Mm-hmm.
Would be
in pragmatism, they talk about this kind of talk back of the situation, that the situation talks back to you, and that you're in a negotiation with the situation. Now you talk about the differences you see. You put a brick there and you see what happens and you move it around. Have you looked into kind of these kind of pragmatist or practice-oriented approaches to playfulness?
No.
No.
Not really. I've been
no.
more focused on the experience and the phenomenon of things. So that, because my approach has been to design for the experience, to understand the experience, how it emerges in interaction, and then from that understanding, I try to work with how can we then apply different strategies and so on to not reach that experience, because you can never do so, but at least encourage those kind of experiences. So yeah, I didn't stumble upon pragmatism in these when I searched for these, and also because it is more, it's pragmatism is kind of the other way around, right? You have a, it goes for what works, right? It works like this. Okay, so we implement it like that. Where I come more from theory and the phenomena of things. But Don Eide, who's the father of post-phenomenology, he advocates to mix the two, right?
Yeah.
To mix post-phenomenology and pragmatism, and I don't, and I also think that it can be done and so on. I think mostly it's because it's rooted in these two opposite traditions that were kind of like they just disliked each other. Like phenomenology was from the European continent, and pragmatism was from the American continent, and so they go, we just disagree with you to disagree. And then now I think that a new movement is going on where they're approaching each other and mixing up more ideas. So because they don't need to be counterparts, and Don Eide also advocates to start combining those two approaches and understandings a bit more.
Thank you very much. I have a last question. You focus on movement and to understand kind of the experience and the phenomenon of play. And I was thinking words like atmosphere or moods, that is very much at the center of phenomenology. How do you link them to the understanding of movement and experimentation and such?
If I link them,
Connect them to your framework.
Connect atmospheres and so on.
Yeah, because it's at the center of kind of understanding what is an experience, understanding it from the perspective of phenomenology.
Yeah.
What is an experience?
What an experience is.
Yeah, that's what you're studying, right? So play is an experience, and that's something.
Yeah. That's based on all the things that I've talked about movement and all the surrounding conditions and so on. So that makes up the experience. So when you talk about atmosphere, I think what I'm just trying to understand, because I haven't worked with atmosphere in my work, and also I don't mention it, and the people that all the theories that I've read, they don't mention atmosphere. So I'm just trying to understand what you are aiming at, and of course an atmosphere that's like the magic circle, right? The protective frame and so on. That's also an atmosphere where that's created by the sum of all movements, and movements are intentions, right? So that's created by all the movement possibilities and all the agents that are involved create an atmosphere. But we also have preconditions bodily, but also experientially, right? So they are also bounded by that. So an atmosphere is also dependent on those prior experiences. For instance, we get to a place, you know, that's supposed to be calm and so on, but we've just run away from a volcano, then we would enter a group of people that had an atmosphere that was calm and soothing and nice and comfortable, and then we would just run in and say, help, 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 you know, I just, then we would change the atmosphere because we had a prior experience of that. Or if we somehow, I for instance, I wrote to Alvinge, co-supervisor, something and a manifesto. And then he replied, hey, you know what manifesto means to a Norwegian? You know, you remember Breivik and the terror and so on. I was like, yeah, sure. I'm so sorry. So he had a prior experience that I also had, but I wasn't here when that happened. And that also is part of creating the atmosphere. So so of course it's part of that, and also what we've learned, right? How well we are, and how much also the games that we've learned to play, and the games that we haven't learned to play, and so on. So of course it's the atmosphere is at least how I understand it. Of course, created by all of these, but also by the intention, by the game, and so on, will create hopefully a playful atmosphere. It need not do so because it also depends on the people being part of it. So, definitely you can also define that what you design also creates an atmosphere, like you design for an experience, and you can never know whether that actually also will be the experience or will be the atmosphere that's created. You can only anticipate it, and maybe you're able to anticipate it so strongly in the design that the people will also will understand your intentions and do so and follow those intentions and explore them. And sometimes it might also just be that you don't want to really put down intentions on people, but just say, hey, you know, here's a thing that hopefully will just encourage your curiosity. And then let's see what you can find out. Let's see what you can create from this. So I think that we can anticipate it, and we can do it more strongly or not, but it's very dependent on all the bodily preconditions and paraphernalia, right?
Yeah, and the experiences and the things around and such. Yeah,
particularly
yeah.
also, yeah.
Thank you very much, Louise. I think time's up now.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, thank you very much for an interesting discussion. And I didn't get any questions from the audience during the break, but I'll open up for one if there are any. I'm not going to give you much, how do we say, thinking time. So that was it then. The formal public defense of the doctoral work of Louise Pettersen Macheka is now finished. The evaluation committee, myself, Katrin and Stine, will withdraw and finalize the evaluation report to the faculty of the faculty. Yeah. In the meantime, on behalf of the faculty, I would like to invite all attendants over to Department of Computer Science to share a drink. And we have a guide, Silje, over there. She will follow you there to Oasen, for those of you who are not familiar with the Oasen. And we will, the committee will arrive as soon as possible. So yeah. So thank you very much for your attendance. Yeah.